This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
The best games I've ever run were ones I ran on the fly.
I've been avoiding speaking so far because I'm...
And you've been doing a great job.
This is a group storytelling activity, not a dungeon master setting up something that people can rotely walk through.
Wise Wizard Games is a board game developer who are using AI art tools in the development of their trading card game.
People will say, oh, well, it's not illegal. It's like, yeah, because the law was defined at a time when we couldn't comprehend of this kind of technology.
No ethical way of using AI.
Do you think that future pre-written adventure modules implement the Bastion system as a core part?
Would require the Bastion system to have been tested a lot more than I have a feeling it was.
Yeah, I got a vocabulary, Dael. Be surprised.
Okay, but you're using it wrong.
All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in the realms, and we are here right now to make you feel good on what is probably a very nice day, evening, morning, wherever you are listening to us before you snuggle in a bed at night, putting us on while you do some painting or the dishes or something, some other activity, driving to work. I see you there. Wherever you are, out on a jog right now, the Eldritch Lorecast is here to keep you company. My name's Ben Byrne, joined as always by Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, James Hake. And James, I come to you with a question from Tony, who posted this question on our Spotify questions. That's right, person driving the car. You can stop your car right now and ask a question to us via Spotify. Tony's asking if you had as long as you wanted to prepare a campaign, how would you use your prep time? What would you focus on the most?
The whole campaign. I would spend most of my time on the villains and a location that could be a hub for the characters.
Ooh.
And in fact, that's what I did for my current campaign. Because if I know a lot about the villain, their motivations, what they will do, and why they want to do it, that is enough for me to imagine any sort of scenario and put a compelling engine in that story. Because, you know, the characters will come to me with their own motivations, and that's a great story engine, but it's a little bit out of my hands. Until that engine kicks in, or if I even know if it will kick in, depending on what kind of players I've got, I know I have something villain motivated that will get them moving. And the hub is vital as well. Because the first adventure, you know, you want to have conflict in the hub city, whether it's a city or a village or a dungeon, perhaps the first floor of a mega dungeon, some place that they can retreat to and feel relatively, if not completely safe retreating to restock and rest and even perhaps form a bastion in using these, using the nice new DMG that they have for 5th edition.
Ooh, fancy.
Using those new rules. That prep is the most bang for my buck. It gets me the most mileage out of the least amount of time spent because it is so reusable, so evergreen. Many permutations of that stuff can be used for a several session, 100 session, a 5-year long campaign, anything.
Since the question said we had a long time to do this, I'm going to assume I've already done a lot of the stuff that James just talked about. The thing that I normally don't get a chance to do, but would do if I had a long time, would be to find ways to tie the story that the campaign is going to foment in ways that the characters can interact with it in very personal ways. So I am going to find a way to connect the villain to the characters via organizations or via families or via any way that becomes important so that from the very first encounter to the very last encounter, I have these hooks to say, hey, player one, remember that organization you belong to that you were so proud of? When you get to this city over here, you realize that the chapter of this, something's wrong, and you have to figure out why. This guy you thought you knew was just made the leader of this chapter. You might need to investigate this. He was your friend growing up. I wonder what happened that changed him so. That's the sort of thing that I never have enough time to do. But if I did have that time, that's what I would do.
I feel almost the opposite in the way that that's kind of the stuff I tend to work on a lot, But then when it gets into the session, I'm like, oh no, what are you rolling dice about right now? What is the combat encounter you are experiencing right now? Because for me, it's almost like there's two modes of prep. There's like long-term or overarching prep, and then there's the immediate, almost level design of like, what is the dungeon that they are walking around? What is the building they are walking in right now? And that's the stuff I feel like I never have prepped out far enough in advance. I'm a bit of a self-diagnosed overprepper though. Like I virtually write a full adventure module in terms of like fleshing out dungeons. And if I have an adventure module, I virtually rewrite the adventure module in terms of like fleshing out dungeons into my own shorthand. But that's back in the day when I did have endless time to prep because I was a casual relief teacher, which meant that I was unemployed. I would have days to just like create dungeons weeks ahead of when they were actually going to be experiencing that stuff, which sometimes resulted in some unused content because they didn't choose to go in that direction. But that's when I feel safest session to session, is having stuff to throw immediately in front of them to interact with.
How's that the opposite of what I said? Because what I said literally you have to create the adventure first, and that's what normally I spend my time doing. If I had more time, then I would make those connections to groups, to players.
Because I feel like what I'm saying is that when I usually prep, I'm creating those long-term connections to groups and villains and stuff, whereas what I would prefer is immediately what's happening in front of them in any given moment. Whereas it felt like you said what you're usually good at is figuring out what to throw in them immediately in any given moment. But if you had more time, you would like to create more of those connections. And Does that make sense?
No, but I'm over it.
Okay, sure. Dael Kingsmill.
Get him. Hello, I'm suddenly having a great day. I'm kind of here with Primrose Frost in chat, who says, first things first for campaign planning, I need a deadline. This question is a nightmare for me. I agree. The ADHD does it like a long prep time means nothing to my brain chemistry, but let's assume that I was neurodivergent and that it was going to make a difference. Well, there are such things that I do tend to do, like my mythical Dragon Heist campaign that has never and probably will never manifest, where I spend a lot of time prepping and planning like a year's calendar, because I want Dragon Heist to not be pick a season, do that season. I want it to take place over all 4 seasons. Sims 4 Seasons expansion. You get it. So I'm like putting in little holidays and festivals and things in where major events can happen. You know, you got to do this thing during this parade, and it's a lot of fun. And then having like separate calendars that are like, okay, well, this is the planned sequence of events for each of these factions and major bad guys, but then those will get altered by what the goodies choose to do and tackle at what time, just so you kind of have an idea of what's happening when. That's something that I have a lot of fun doing. I probably would also spend a lot of time sort of getting my players to microdose sort of character play. Getting them to, because you know, there's a lot of, I chose my word carefully, but you know, there's a lot of talk about backstories, but I would love to do little like mini, not even mini solo sessions, but just little back and forths of like, I don't know, prodding, asking questions, getting them to answer the questions, maybe putting 2 people in a little chat together and getting them to do a tiny little play by post interaction with each other. That sort of thing, just so that they get those sort of, they seep in those kind of character elements for a while ahead of the game. That's probably what I'd focus on.
You've touched on something which was kind of my editorializing follow-up question, because I was reminded of a story someone was telling me where they were excited to play and they had a GM who was going to run a game for them. And the GM was like, yep, we'll start on like X date and it's going to be great. You guys are really going to love it. I'm planning this amazing world. It's going to be fantastic. And then the date got pushed because the GM was like, oh, I actually need a little bit more time, but don't worry, it's going to be really cool. It's going to be great. And the date got pushed like again. And then I think they didn't have a date for a while. And the sense that the players were getting was, this is never good. Like, this person is writing their Lord of the Rings magnum opus.
Yeah, it's become a world building exercise rather than a campaign. Yeah.
Exactly. So how long is too long to prep, and what does over prepping look like?
Well, let me say, as another self-diagnosed over prepper, The best games I've ever run were ones I ran on the fly. So, I mean, make of that what you will.
Ben, I think you've described it perfectly. And Dael, you've described it perfectly too. Every time I listen to people talk about their stories of, intensely prepped campaign ending final bosses, they're always like, that didn't go as well as I'd hoped it would. I did all this prep and I kind of let myself down because it didn't go the way I'd imagined it in my head. And that's the problem of over prepping, is you build up a sort of, it's like when you're in a bad relationship, it's like you built up this idea of a person in your head. You build up this idea of a campaign or an adventure in your head. And then when the rubber hits the road, it doesn't match that. And your expectations are let down. And players do something. And like when you do the right amount of prep, when you find that sweet spot, you are neither stressed from flying by the seat of your pants, and you are not disappointed by things not following your idea. When you find that sweet spot, it's like, I know just enough to be reactive on the fly, to be able to improvise, to be as surprised by the players as the players are by me. And that, I think, is the joyous part of D&D. That's why my core of prep is what I was saying, is about the hub and the villain. That gives me enough structure to basically react to anything and feel like, even if I don't know what to do, I can find a way to draw it back to the things that I do know how to do. Yeah, so I guess it's not a very specific answer to how much prep is too much prep, but maybe someone else has those specifics.
3 hours per... No, wait. It's when you lose sight of what's important about the game to your players specifically. And if you prep it, as I think James and Dael both said it great, if you prep enough so that the players are going to have the best time and you are going to enjoy their enjoyment of it, then you've prepped enough for that game. Going further, it can be fine. It can be great to be a world builder and have your joy that way. But if you lose sight of where the rubber meets the pavement, if you will, that's when things start to be less than what they originally could have been.
What's that old saying? The plan is nothing, but the planning is everything.
It's either Patton or Churchill. I don't remember which, but it's plans are useless. Planning is essential.
There you go. That's the one. That sounds maxim. Much better than what I said. But yeah, exactly. Because it really is. It's the point of prepping, I think, ultimately, is so that when everything goes off the rails and you don't know what's happening and they've made decisions that you could never have anticipated, you have enough information in your brain that you can sort of reroute and go a different way, and still know what the villain is up to in the background and make it feel fleshed out. And you are capable of running those nasty goblins on the fly or whatever it may be. You've done enough prep work that you can scrap the plan comfortably.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I over prep is because I find that, and this was going to be my follow-up question, for me personally, I prefer to be prepped because the game is more fun for me when I feel like the story, not that it's going the way it should be, but I haven't lost the thread of the plot, because the players have thrown me a curveball. If they ask a question I don't instantly have a prepped answer to, I still feel like the answer belongs within the story that we're telling, rather than me just pulling something so out of thin air that it's like, oh, I don't know, you're in the Feywild and a vampire crawls out from under the ground. That just feels like, I kind of pierced the veil of believability of my own world and my own story here. And so feeling prepped well enough that it doesn't just feel like we're off in Rick and Morty land, nothing matters, everything's oogly boogly, is, I suppose, the level that I like to get to, if that makes sense. Do you all feel the same, or do you prefer, like Dael said, some of the best games you've run have been kind of off the cuff?
It's interesting you say this, Ben, because in the campaign that I'm running at home right now, one of my players has often said that they don't like playing D&D very much. That it's the best option they have available. They don't like playing it very much because they feel as if it is, it's too loosey-goosey. Insofar as the DM has ultimate say. So it's like if we die or if we win, it's not really because of anything we did in the games, because, it's kind of the way that the DM wanted it to go. I don't fully agree with that, but I do want to try playing a game sometimes where everything is meticulously planned and you play it to the hilt. And, you got to improvise a little bit, but you play it as straight as possible. You take a dungeon module, take Sunless Citadel or something and play that absolutely straight. and see how much fun the game is, right? Because then it is, is almost adversarial challenge, but the DM is playing, with very strict rules behind them.
This is going to sound off topic, but I swear it is connected, at least in my mind. So there's a thing that really bugs me in movies at the moment. I feel like it's become really common where it feels like the movie has been made because at some point, someone involved, a director, a producer, someone somewhere along the line was like, wouldn't it be cool? And then we'll have them stand on this cliff top overlooking and it'll be this great visual moment, right? And so you get these kind of weird sequences that don't really make sense because it feels like they're just trying to string together a bunch of kind of visual moments rather than making a movie and telling a story, right? And it really bugs me in cinema. But I think that is perfect for the medium of TTRPGs because the way that we experience TTRPGs is so much of navigating around narrative, right? We're talking on a level usually that is not, we don't spend the entire time in character. We're asking questions a lot. We're clarifying things a lot. We're referencing rules a lot. We're playing around narrative in a weird way. And then you get these big narrative beats. And those are the things that stick in your memory. And when you're looking back at the game, that's the thing that you're like, oh, remember when the owlbear bear hugged you and it cracked all your ribs? And then it's these awesome sort of standout visual moments. You don't remember that it was like, oh yeah, and I rolled a 5 on my saving throw. You don't remember that junk. You remember the visual moments. And so I try to capture that a lot. And so when I'm not prepping I brought it back. So when I talk about, the best sessions I've run or the best one-shots that I've run have often been the ones I haven't prepped for, it's often because it's the purest version of that where I'm like, all I have for this is one really cool visual moment, like moment of action, moment of whatever, scene setting, I don't know, tension, whatever it may be. I've got this really cool idea for this one moment. And that's the only thing that I'm building the rest of the session around on the fly. And so because of that, in a weird way, it just props up that visual moment more and means that the memory of what the game was is a little bit kind of more concentrated sometimes.
And it's because this is a group storytelling activity, not a dungeon master setting up something that people can rotely walk through and experience what the game master as a director wants you to experience. That's why you can set up. I still remember I was playing, but we had this huge room and we knew there were monsters in it, but it was all foggy, couldn't see. And of course, our blind fighting monk ran into the middle of the room and he starts doing and he got paralyzed. And we're all still waiting outside the fog going, And somebody said, maybe we should rush in. I'm like, if he was in trouble, he'd yell. It's that sort of situation where you have the memory of it, not because it's perfectly structured, but because you're letting the players navigate it as much as you are just setting it up and spinning the top and watching it slowly fall.
Speaking of watching things slowly fall, we should move into our news of the week. There's not much news, but a few interesting stories. I thought this first one was interesting. Maybe we slam through it quickly because it's a well-worn topic for us by this point. Everybody knows, if you've been listening to this podcast for more than one episode, how the Eldritch Lorecast feels about the nature of AI art in particular, but also AI language models.
That's
being incorporated into the tabletop industry. What I thought was interesting about this story is that the attitude from an industry perspective seems to be a little bit different on the board game side of things as opposed to the RPG side of things. And this story has been going on for the last sort of 6 months. There are aspects in it from a little while, but basically the most recent update, Wise Wizard Games is a board game developer who are using AI art tools in the development of their trading card game, of all things. Draconis 8 is using AI art in it. And that is, to me, peculiar because half the reason you buy a trading card game is for the art. Literally half the card is art. And so I don't think that and this is me personally, would be into a trading card game if I knew that the art used AI, just because I feel not any sort of moral judgment about it, but I would just feel like I'm not getting, something that somebody made,
solid amount
with their
of what
hands.
the product you paid for. Yeah.
The Kickstarter has done relatively well. The company claims that their use of AI art, the lead artist, Antonis Papantonio, feeds their own art into a program such as DALL-E or Midjourney and then paints over what has been generated out of that from their own artwork. I'm not sure, unless they're creating a language model from scratch, I'm not sure that doesn't use other people's artwork in the training of the model in the first place. I don't think you can train a model off 20 pieces of art, 30 pieces of art, 100 pieces of art. I think you need to train it off.
It's called a large
thousands.
Language model. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, Draconis 8, the card game, has been able to make 321 pieces of art, claiming that they only would have been able to make about 17 in the same space of time.
This is what gets me, though, because the way I was reading it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I very well could be wrong.
Well, just let me clarify for people. If you want to, because the full article is quite interesting. It's on Board Game Wire. I will link it in the show notes and stuff if people want to go read the full thing. But go on, Dael.
The way I was reading it, I thought that this was AI-generated art for use in the Kickstarter, but you're saying that this was AI-generated or the use of AI-generated art in the process of making art for the game itself, for the card game itself.
I believe so. There are Kickstarter. There are other companies that we might talk about in a moment that used AI art for the promotional material of the Kickstarter that may or may not have been in the game itself. Although knowing a little bit about how Kickstarters work, if you're generating promotional art for the Kickstarter, it's going to be in the game itself. Like
for sure. Well, no, it just changes my reaction to it a little bit in terms of like when I first read that we generated 300 plus pieces of art in the time it would have taken to make 17. I was like, why do you need 300 plus pieces of art? Like what? Huh?
Sure.
Like why couldn't you use 17? But if it's in generating stuff for the cards themselves, look, I agree with you that it's just that for me, like when I'm getting Magic the Gathering cards, a solid half of that, probably more than half of that, is because I'm like, look at this incredible piece of art that a person made. I'm not going to take a hardline stance on an artist's process because, collage exists. But like you said, it's more complicated than just saying, oh, well, I fed my own art into the system. It is at this particular point in time, with all the information that I have available, it's more complicated than that. And so trying to hand wave it in that way frustrates me.
Yeah, that's why I find the article interesting, is because the article does introduce a little bit of nuance into this discussion. There are definitely some people within the board game space. Most famously, I believe, is Stonemaier Games, who you might know for Wingspan, have come out and been very critical of the use of any sort of AI art in the production of board games. However, on the flip side of that, companies such as Awaken Realms, who you might know for Nemesis, was their most famous board game, I believe, which was kind of like the Alien type game where you're being hunted around a spaceship. That didn't use AI art, I don't believe, just for clarity. But Grim Coven, their latest Kickstarter, which did something like 2.2 million back in July or something, did use AI art, and that was known at the time. Stronghold Games, who create Terraforming Mars, have been using AI art in their most recent crowdfunding efforts, and these crowdfunding efforts have been very successful. So it doesn't seem like AI art is harming anybody who is deciding to.
It is an interesting one because you do see it a lot in crowdfunding campaigns, Kickstarters, and all the backer kids, all the things. You see the use of AI art there a lot, and I think that's because it comes from a place of seeming, from their perspective, they feel like it's a necessity. We don't have the money yet. We need to advertise this game. How can we sell people on it without art? Well, let's use AI art to get the campaign up. You know what I mean? But then it does become sort of a slippery slope to how do we then not use that in the game itself? It becomes an interesting question of, is it some kind of false advertising if you're using this kind of art that's not going to be present in the game itself if you do decide not to use AI generated art. Even if you do use AI generated art, how can you guarantee the art's going to continue along in that same style? It's all these weird little elements that pop up when.
Does it change your opinion, Dael? Like if you see a Kickstarter that you think, yeah, that looks pretty good. I want that product, regardless of whether I want to support the company. I want that product. They've used AI art in the advertising, but you can, and this scenario is a pure hypothetical to be honest, but they have said there is no AI generated art in the product itself. This AI art is used as proof of concept, which our artists have generated, but the art in the product itself will be purely hand-drawn, hand-created by our artists using this earlier concept art. Does that make you feel better about purchasing the product?
No. I mean, me personally, at that point would be like, okay, well then I don't know what the product is going to look like, and I would rather wait until there is a product that I can see with my eyes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've been avoiding speaking so far because I'm...
and you've been doing a great job.
Because, as anyone who's watched the show regularly knows, I'm really hardline about this. I see no ethical way of using AI, right? Between its ethically dubious way of training their large language models off of unsourced, unsighted, and uncompensated work scraped off of the internet, and its massive environmental impact from its energy draw to its use of water. And there's all sorts of, criticisms that can be made of that hard line. It's like if you made 300 and however many pieces of art they were going to make here, and you hired artists to do every single one of them, would the energy output of all of that artist's work on their tablets or whatever be equivalent to the amount that AI used? I'm pretty sure the answer to that is no, but would it be a close contest? I can't say for sure. But at the end of the day, it's simply a matter of ethics and sourcing. This is plagiarism. It's straight up plagiarism to use an artist's work unsourced, and that's even if you launder it through a language model machine. We were all taught this in grade school, in high school. Back then, it was a serious offense. If you plagiarize in college, your position at that university is in jeopardy. And so it infuriates me to see it be sort of ignored so casually in the professional world.
And it's worth mentioning as well, because I brought up collage earlier, right? And there have been arguments put forward that it's like, well, we allow for art that, takes other people's work and incorporates it in traditional forms of art. Why don't we allow it in this digital format? And my answer to that is that when we talk about things like fair use, okay, so the key element is transformative, right? Like we talk about collage as a transformative thing. If you are using someone's photo, which is their intellectual property, you have to have put in substantial work on your end to have transformed that piece, right? In order for it to qualify for a fair use defense. When you put something through AI, there's no intellectual transformation going on. It is, to a degree, laundry. You're just sticking it through a thing and it's going, and then you get it on the other end. And even if you do stuff on that end, that process that has been used in the AI phase has not put in intellectual creative transformation into the work, would be a thing I would bring up in the face of that kind of...
It's a thing you have brought up.
It's a thing I have brought up.
Yes.
I want to keep an open mind about this as much as I can. I don't like being closed-minded about nearly anything, especially not emerging and potentially really cool and world-changing new technology. I really want AI to be used ethically, responsibly, because I think it has enormous power to advance human civilization. It's just every way we've seen it used so far in its infancy has been basically to funnel money to big rich tech companies at the expense of artists, at the expense of people who don't have a lot of capital. And it's just sad. It just makes me sad and angry.
I was doing a better job than James of not saying anything. But what James just said is my thought on this is technology will come, technology will go. Some of it will be great and used forever. Some of it will be discarded. But when it is used in the way AI is being used now, it is just plain wrong to funnel money to people who do not need it from people who do. And if you go full capitalist here, right? Oh, they're lowering their costs on that end. Excellent. They will obviously charge less for the product because it didn't cost them as much to make it. Now, wait a second. This is exactly the same price as this other book that used real artists. How is this done?
This is the thing. This is the thing, right? Because I think a lot of folks do see it as like, oh wow, what a great like revolution that enables the little guy to like achieve things in business that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. I can now get art for my Kickstarter, so now it can get funded, and I wouldn't have been able to afford that. Sure. But the thing is that because we don't have any regulations on it, the big guys are also able to do it, and they're able to take more advantage of it than you are. And you know what happened? You ever see the movie Moneyball? All right. The Oakland A's, they didn't have any money, so they used statistics, and they did this incredible thing, had this incredible season of baseball because they were just like crunching the numbers. What can we do without money? Right? And they had a great season. You know what happened immediately after that? All the rich baseball teams also started doing that, but they also had money. So they could buy the best players and they can play Moneyball. So it doesn't work in the long run. And it's just really infuriating because you look at, you know, when we talk about intellectual property law and its relationship with AI, people will say, oh, well, it's not illegal. It's like, yeah, because the law was defined at a time when we couldn't comprehend of this kind of technology. The idea that a corporation or that a machine would create something when they don't even have an intellect. Like the idea that, forget AI, the idea that the Disney Corporation, which will never die because it's not a human being, can own intellectual property is insane. We need a whole revision of the whole thing. I'm sorry. Okay. I know I was never trying to not talk, but I feel like I lost the not talking game.
Do you want to know the worst part of all of this? The Oakland A's are now moving to Las Vegas.
No!
Yeah!
Yes. That's really the moral of this story. It's sad.
Awaken Realms as a board game company, look, they're not Hasbro by any measure, right? But they're also an established, successful company that I don't think would require AI art to be able to prop up their next Kickstarter, in my opinion. So
I was looking at the art of this game. It looks like AI art. It looks like it's the average of every piece of art that League of Legends has ever produced. That's what AI art looks like mostly. And it can do plenty of other stuff. It can do fairly realistic human beings. It can copy an artist's art style. It's all that stuff. And none of that is good. But one of the lesser things that galls me about all of this, that all of this AI art that people are producing for board games just kind of looks like the same fantasy crap. Right? Yeah. It just looks the same.
As someone who loves dark fantasy, Grim Coven, the art for it just looks a little... I think it was Adam Savage at one point said that like AI art doesn't have a perspective. It doesn't have a point of view. It doesn't have an opinion. And though Grim Hollow is grim and dark, the one thing I try to inject into it, and Shawn does as a writer, and Matt Domino, our art director, does, is a perspective, an opinion, a thing to say, aside from just be sad. Kyle Ferrin, who's the artist for Root, did equivocate AI art to like slop for pigs, I believe. I got a vocabulary, Dael. Be surprised.
Okay, but you're using it wrong.
Am I?
Damn, I'm sorry. No, that was so mean. That was so mean. I actually feel guilt.
That was perfect because you kept me from having to say it. Equate means equal. Equivocate means to sort of go back and forth and not really state your...
Oh, man.
There's a whole monologue about this in Macbeth, Ben Byrne.
I've been using that word wrong for the last 15 years.
Well, we don't equivocate here, Ben. We tell it like it is.
Yeah, right. Fair enough.
I feel so bad.
I don't feel bad. It's fine. Just, public roasting. It's all good. Nevertheless.
Oh my God, there are tears in my eyes.
Oh my gosh.
The Board Game Wire article is up if people want to go check it out and get the full gamut of this discussion. The article, if folks don't want to check the links down below, is Star Realms maker Wise Wizard Games defends using AI art in new projects. I didn't know that this Facebook group existed until the other day, but this is really cool. 2025 could see a tabletop game jobs fair possibly happening at either Gamma Expo, which is a licensing games convention, Gen Con, or possibly PAX Unplugged. This games fair originates from Tabletop Game Jobs, which is a Facebook group with about 20,000 members currently, which acts as a jobs board for the tabletop industry. The group was founded by Ross Thompson and Jessica Fisher. And there's also Tabletop Game Jobs Talents, which is kind of if you're a talent or if you're someone who wants to work in the industry looking for a job, you can go post in that Facebook group. Ross Thompson was talking, I believe, on Twitter about the idea of doing a jobs fair and that it was going to exist in the ideas phase for the time being because he didn't personally have time to do it. However, apparently an organization has approached him with a proposal to make it a reality. And so it's still in the ideas phase. There's no real announcement here, but just we get asked all the time, how do I get a job in the tabletop RPG industry or the tabletop industry or whatever? This is not a guaranteed way in necessarily. I've never used this Facebook page, but I thought people might appreciate knowing about this. And if you're going to the convention where this fair may occur, it might be worth checking out.
See, that's sick because that is how you can find yourself. Hey, I'm a small company and I need artists. Hey, I'm an artist and I need a small company to make art for. And instead of us all turning to AI, look, there's a jobs fair. I love that.
I mean, literally that. I believe Ross Thompson was quoted as saying in an article that I was reading that, which might have also been on Board Game Wire, to be fair, was that like they get asked all the time, hey, by publishers, by creators, by companies, hey, we need an X specific role. How do we find this person? And, it's difficult. When we were looking for a media editor for Ghostfire, Dante was perfect, not only because he had all the skills required, above and beyond all the skills required for the role, but had an innate understanding and love for tabletop RPGs. And in roles that aren't necessarily like game designer, that can be a difficult, specific thing to find. When you're looking for, customer support, if a customer support person doesn't know what a D20 is, it can become difficult to answer those sort of questions. So there's lots of roles within the tabletop industry aside from just game developer or artist or writer or whatever that hopefully this services those people as well. Speaking of cool announcements, this is just a quickie, just a quick one to throw out there. Ghostfire Gaming, this company, is teaming up with Steamforged Games. That's right. Grim Hollow and Epic Encounters are teaming up next year. I honestly don't have much more to say about this right now. Aside from that, I know what we're cooking up and I'm incredibly excited about it. As someone who loves miniatures and boxes of miniatures, this is extremely cool. Also, Steamforged has already teamed up with Free League to create 2 Ruins of Symbaroum Epic Encounter boxes, which are coming out in Feb. I love the Epic Encounter boxes. I've kind of floated around them the last couple of years as someone who talks often about miniatures. I think they're really cool. So, this is just an exciting announcement to see Steamforged working with other companies to create specific Epic Encounters type boxes.
I was really delighted to hear that news when I saw it on the run sheet, Ben. Epic Encounters is awesome. I love the concept. And I know that when I was there in the Ghostfire office back however many years ago it was, and I was in Melbourne for a couple of weeks, we talked very highly about them. Just like, ambiently in the office, like they make such good stuff. What would it take for us to make stuff like that? Well, I don't know. They've kind of got the...
If you ever wondered what the ambient dialogue of the NPCs at the Ghostfire office is.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure we have, boxes of their stuff in the office too, just because it's so cool. Yeah. So, this is a match made in heaven, seriously.
I've been tempted to sneak out with a couple of their boxes before, and I might just do that one day.
Sneak out and paint them and then bring them back, and they'll open up and be like, I didn't know they pre-painted these. And you'll be like, Yeah, no, they don't.
That's what I should do. Their Frost Giant's incredible. Their Draco Turtle, I think it is really fantastic as well. So, excited for that one. Just a little bit of news that came out of EN World. Darryl Mott, who's a columnist for EN World, does the weekly news digest there. Those haven't been going up the last couple of weeks, which I noticed because I use those to kind of find out what's going on for this podcast. Darryl, unfortunately, has been experiencing some medical issues, has been in hospital for the last couple of weeks. I don't know Darryl personally. I don't know if any of us do. Shawn, I don't know if you know him personally. But just a general well wishes. It sounds like he's on the mend currently, but not quite there. So, just a general well wishes to fellows within the industry. Email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, which is what Jerome did. Actually, I believe this was a Spotify question as well. Pull over, write your Spotify questions. Jerome asks, do you think that future pre-written adventure modules, most likely from Wizards of the Coast would be their meaning, will implement the Bastion system as a core part of the adventure?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say for Wizards of the Coast, maybe. For other people creating on the DM's Guild, definitely. The reason I'm questioning it is because to add it to an adventure, you really need to make sure the system that you're moving up against is solid. So you could get something like, hey, and you can put your Bastion here. That's completely reasonable. To have it be anything more would require the Bastion system to have been tested a lot more than I have a feeling it was.
Sure.
Straight up. I mean, that's not because they did anything wrong, but I don't think it was meant to interact with adventures in that particular way. Everything I've seen about the Bastion system is that you can use this to create stuff. It's not like, and now it's going to be attacked and you need to have defenses around it. I say this because for the Oracle of War campaign, we created a salvage system where you built salvage bases, and we knew that we would have adventures later in the series that said, your base is about to be attacked. So hopefully you took some of that defensive stuff in our rules for for creating your salvage base, because we know that we're going to interact with that system.
I wanted to check this out because one of the first things that the Bastion system tells you in terms of mechanics, in fact, it's the first mechanical item they give you, is players gain their Bastion at level 5. That's the thing it tells you. Straight up says it. And the D&D adventure thus far that has been published that has the most possible Bastion sort of reverse engineering. The thing, if I went to Wizards and said, hey, I've got an adventure idea. Whoa, I went all blurry. Hold on. Whoa. Okay. If I went to Wizards and I said, hey, I think you should rework one of your past adventures between, now and back in 2014 to heavily include, fundamentally include a Bastion mechanic. I would say it's Waterdeep Dragon Heist because you gain a base in that adventure. Mm-hmm. But that adventure ends at 5th level. There would need to be a very fundamental reworking of that adventure just by the inclusion of the idea that Bastion stuff comes online at a certain part of your character progression.
Perhaps in this reworking, they could make it so that you play throughout a year and all seasons. No.
Have you heard of Saga of the Seasons, Dael? I feel like it's an adventure module that would be right up your alley.
I was going to say, my theory is, my original theory was no, I don't think they'll include it because it has that particular kind of sheen across Bastions that is like, this feels like a Dungeon Master's Guide add-on. You know what I mean? And it's not that that's and it's not that that's an impossible delay. I think Storm King's Thunder included a couple of stuff. Now my language is good, so there we go. We match, Ben. There were a couple of bits where they would include very Dungeon Master's Guide add-on sections of like destroying walls or whatever. And it always feels a little bit like when a movie, you go to see a movie in 2D, but it was made 3D, and there's a scene in there that you're like, that is only in there because it's 3D. And now I'm watching it 2D and it doesn't make sense. That kind of vibe. But my mind has been changed a little bit by Shawn and James because they have promised higher level adventures on the way. I think if they want to do higher level adventures, it does kind of make sense to chuck the Bastions in there. I don't know, have a little bit of fun with it. But I still find it tricky to imagine what that looks like. You know what I mean? Like when Ghostfire comes out with an adventure module that's like, hey, we've got this cool like Bastion style system, or you know, we've got our seafaring rules, or when MCDM come out with an adventure, it feels like the adventure was the thing that you wanted to do, and then the mechanics were a necessary element of making that the best it could be. Whereas with D&D, for me, I'm just kind of not like hyped about it because it always feels a little bit like, here was a mechanical idea we wanted to implement, and now we're finding ways to put it into adventures. But that's also me just projecting and making stuff up from the future that hasn't happened yet. So hopefully they use it and it's amazing and wondrous and everyone's very excited about it.
At the end of the day, it just has to be good.
Since James got to plug Waterdeep Dragon Heist, let me tell you about Acquisitions Incorporated, where we have a franchise system where you can build your franchise, which not only includes the physical space, but also your hirelings and your underlings and other people that you can use to create a full business, which you will then have to protect from other people that are going to try to raid it or take it over.
Whilst we're speaking of spruiking adventures, I did want to ask James, do you think Saga of the Seasons would do well with Bastions in the village? You know, when do you hit level 5? Is it at the end of the first season, at the end of spring?
It's at the end of the first season.
And is that like, okay, we're off now going to raid through summer. We've established our Bastions just before we've left.
Yes, so I think Bastions would work extremely well in Saga of the Seasons because a lot of that adventure is about building out the defenses of your village. And the whole point of the raid is you need cash. You need resources to do all that, whether it's gold or timber or iron. Valaka is a land that, you know, it can mine those resources. It can cut down the forest, though there are consequences to doing so. There are creatures that live in there that don't like it when you do that. But if it wants stuff, its land is harsh and desolate. It needs to go raiding. That's why Vikings went raiding. And so I think the idea of, hey, you can make a really cool bastion. This is a thing that you can really personalize. I think that would add a lot to the adventure. And it would give players a really strong reason to want to go out and plunder, which is a sort of ludonarrative harmony, right? The mechanics, the story and the mechanics work together to create a certain mood.
Well, ludonarrative harmony is what I'm trying to find with Bastions, because I think that they're a cool idea, but I think as folks who might have even emailed this podcast have noted in the past or talked about in the chat, the idea of going out and adventuring and like going on a journey, a Lord of the Rings style journey. If you're Frodo and you've got a bastion back in the Shire, who cares?
Well, when the Shire gets scoured, maybe they'll care
maybe you'll
and
care
have a
then,
whole section of book about it.
But that's not the point of the story, at least initially, right? Until you get back to the Shire, I suppose, towards the end. But another place I'm thinking of using Bastions is my party when we kind of wrapped up the last leg of our campaign back before Gen Con. They had just basically toppled one of the members of the Crimson Court holding Fellowheart and installed their own kind of a leader with a claim to the nobility of Fellowheart. And now they're going to leave that city, but it makes sense to me that like you put a bastion somewhere in this city to really give you roots and you'll need to come back and defend it because other Crimson Court members will want to attack it. And that makes a lot of sense to me. But I don't know that that's the way Wizards are going to write adventures. I don't know. My prediction is no. I don't think they will. That was a very sudden end to the topic. All right. Anyway, moving on.
Let me put a real button on the end of this because I'm really interested to see what Wizards does with their Red Wizards of Thay adventure. That is
the first fabled mythical Red Wizards of Thay adventure. Right there with the Venger adventure. Are we still waiting for those?
Well, they were announced as a 2025 release, so you know.
Were they? Okay,
yes.
I'll give them that one.
They say Red Wizards of Thay will be the first adventure release to be, directly designed with the 2024 rules in mind. And
I feel like Marvel movies being announced at Comic-Con 3 years in advance has set a bad precedent. We actually don't need to know about the adventures that far
Because I
ahead.
swear Red Wizards and Venger were both announced last year in 2023.
It feels like
but
it.
I could be wrong.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, sorry, James. not
This
to
year
cut you
does
off.
feel like, 4 years long. But ultimately, if that adventure was designed with the 2024 rules as a complete package in mind, I'm curious to see, I'm hopeful to see, Bastions integrated thoughtfully, because they really seem to be excited by this, right? They wanted us to be excited about it. On all the interviews where they talked about it, they seemed like, oh, look at this cool new thing that we're doing. And so I will believe that they care about that system if the Red Wizards adventure comes out with Bastions as a core component.
Okay, so here's a question. Is the DMG core to running adventures? Because what I'm thinking about is, although I guess, okay, Dael just giving a disgusted no.
I'm afraid the answer's no.
I'm just a proud non-owner of the DMG. So,
well, I guess I just like what I'm wondering is, to run an adventure module, do they expect you to own the DMG?
They best
because
not.
in the 2014 edition, they definitely expected you to own the monster manual, but they didn't expect you to own Volo's Guide to Monsters or Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes,
And
because
they
those monsters were included in the back of the adventure.
Manual. I don't think anyone should be expected to own anything other than the player's handbook. But I've been on that soapbox before, so I'll shut up now.
That's from a publisher perspective, that's tough, because you could end up blowing out.
Well, from a publisher perspective, maybe they shouldn't be publishing 3 core books. Maybe pick one.
It's
just
like
bad
monster
product
manuals.
design to be like, come and play our super niche game that everyone will think you're a nerd for. You have to buy 3 different books. That's insane. Sorry, go on.
That's a bigger problem than. Wow, yeah. There's a lot to unpack there.
It's like the spellcasting system. It's a problem. We all know it's a problem, but they're not going to undo it. But the least we can do is not expect people to own. Sorry, go on. I'm going to shut up now. I'm
a war gamer, so maybe I have a skewed perspective on this, but I don't think 3 books is an unreasonable request to get into a hobby, considering that you have to buy a box of 50 miniatures to get into some war games, right? And you can consider that a difficult proposition. And yeah, that does create a large barrier. But then there's starter boxes like the Lost Mines of Fandelver starter box back in the day. Hopefully, I think they've said they're going to have something new that's equivocal to that. That had all the monsters in it. That didn't expect you to even own the player's handbook because
that's
you had
equivocal to that?
Oh, did I say that again? I'm never going to not say that. Because I've been saying it for 15 years.
I was muted. Why didn't I just stay muted? I'm sorry, Benjamin. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I look, I'll be honest. With other role-playing games, some of my disappointment has been that the monsters are in the core book, because then by the pure physics and nature of publishing, you can't put 150 to 300 monsters in that book. And as the GM who's the monster guy, like I just love, a monster manual is a Christmas tree for me, and every page is a present to unwrap. I love having lots and lots of monsters. So I don't think it's a massive
I just think
problem.
That from an economical product standpoint, it is unfair to expect a person to need any more than a book they bought to achieve what is in the book they bought. You know what I mean? So like you can have a monster book that has a whole bunch of separate cool monsters in it. But if you're going to publish an adventure and say you literally can't, we won't include the stat block, you have to buy a separate $60 AUD book in order to run this adventure, that's not okay. Go ahead, Shawn.
I'm agreeing with both of you, which makes me almost nauseous because we're talking about two different inputs into this game. We're talking about the players. And I agree, the players should only have to buy the one book. As the dungeon master, as the game master, there are things that you should not be putting in front of the players, but you should be putting in front of the game master, aside from an adventure and aside from monsters. And so it comes in the old, where do magic items belong? And the player's guide or the DM's guide is a oft equivocated. No, wait, that's not right. we argue about it. Where should they be? And there is no right or wrong answer because, yes, they definitely shouldn't be in the player's book because the DM should control the flow of that. But they definitely shouldn't not be in there because the players are using them. So there is no right answer. And I think 2 books are fine, and then put monsters in adventures, maybe, or put monsters in the Dungeon Master's Guide and not have a monster manual. That I could see.
Okay. I mean, I'm aware that it's a self-opinion that like more monsters is better, and some folks might feel like the exact opposite, that it's better to have a concise, reasonable list of monsters that are going to show up in this game. But especially a game that the point of it is fighting monsters.
Well, it's not even that I think they should limit the monsters. I just think that if you're going to publish an adventure book that has a monster that's not in the basic core, like, which in my opinion should be 1 book, right? If you're going to do an adventure and be like, here's a brand new monster, put the stat block in the adventure book. You know what I mean? Like, and then you can publish your second monster book with a collection of whatever. Like, you can have your cake and eat it. Like, because we're talking about adventures. You shouldn't publish an adventure expecting that someone will have another product. Oh, what book was it? It must have been in Theros, or one of the D&D books came out and was like, and there's going to be a whole lot of sailing, but you need to go and buy Ghosts of Saltmarsh or wherever the ship rules are. Like, go buy a separate book that has nothing to do with what you want to play if you want to know what the rules are for this. Yeah. I'm just saying the same thing over and over. I get it. No,
I know. Well, I don't think you are. I think you're saying different things, because I would agree with you that, like, for a core mechanic that's part of the adventure, you don't want to go and purchase a book, another adventure module of all things, that kind of has nothing to do with, like, the adventure that you're running. I think the problem with monsters, and I think they found a good solution to it in 2014. Who knows what they're going to do with the 2024 rules, although I would expect the same, to be honest. The solution was, or the kind of half step was, anything that's in the monster manual, you're expected to own the monster manual. Anything that's from another monster book like Tasha's, not Tasha's, sorry, that was a player book, but Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, or Monsters of the Multiverse, or Xanathar, Volo's Guide to Monsters, any of those monsters, sorry, I'm just stumbling over D&D character names, they are in the adventure. So you're not expected to own 3 books to be able to run this adventure, but anything that's from the monster manual, because how many monsters are in an adventure, and some of those monsters are going to be 2 pages, a full spread each. If you're adding like 50 pages to the back of your adventure. Maybe they should
be better at keeping them succinct. What I'm proposing.
No, but I don't agree that, like, a writer should be limited by the monsters they want to include in the book. Like, if it's just like, all right, more wolves, I guess, because I can't add more pages to the back of this book.
I guess.
Like, you can't sell a book that's like 800 pages long because you've had to index the monsters in the back.
I still disagree, but I take your meaning.
We could just only digital products from now on, problem solved. We're all good.
Yeah.
And away we go.
No longer worry about the page count, baby.
That's right.
We will duel in the quadrangle at midnight with rapiers.
I feel like that's what this podcast is dueling in the quadrangle. Everybody takes a corner and then we slowly kind of walk towards the center. And somehow I always get there first and get skewered 3 ways. All right. Anyway, speaking of getting skewered 3 ways, that's the end of this podcast. If you've enjoyed it and want to listen to more skewering, give it a thumbs up or give it some stars or something, whatever your platform prefers. That'll keep me healthy and hale for the next couple of weeks, I'm sure. Otherwise, stars, likes, comments, all that stuff. Email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, and we'll get out of here. My name's Ben Byrne. I'm here with Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, and we will be back next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
That's some good wisdom.
Good wisdom. Yum, 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 yum.
Yum, yum, yum. Good wisdom.
Yum, yum, yum. Good wisdom.